I'm JG Michael, and this is Parallax Views. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. On this edition of the program, we'll be hearing from returning guest, Israeli dissident and commentator Ori Goldberg. We're going to be talking about Trump's MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with Iran, and how it is driving some in Israel completely bonkers. There's a lot of anger right now. You even see it in America with voices like Batya Ungar Sargon, Mark Levin, etc. The yells that Trump has been humiliated, that he's turned his back on Israel, that this is going to ruin everything and whatnot. Ori Goldberg has his own commentary to share on the reaction in Israel, the state of mind in Israel and its shattering classes, and much more. But before we get to that, I need to remind you that this show is almost entirely listener-funded, except for my one sponsor, the mighty Mike Swanson of WallStreetWindow.com. If you'd like to be a sponsor, contact me at ParallaxViewsPod@ProtonMail.com. I could really use sponsorship support. But if you're not a sponsor and you just want to support the show, you're a fan of the show, please consider supporting me on Patreon at patreon.com/ParallaxViews. One more time, that's patreon.com/ParallaxViews. Also, check out my sponsor's website, WallStreetWindow.com. Mike Swanson has one of the best financial and trading newsletters out there. I've had listeners make a return on investment from Mike's trading tips. So check out WallStreetWindow.com. Mike's a straight shooter. I think you'll appreciate his newsletter, and it's free of charge. So sign up now, WallStreetWindow.com. And with that being said, let's get right to it with Ori Goldberg. Welcome back to Parallax Views, a guest that I have on very regularly at this point. He's one of my two regulars, actually. I would say Jim Dorsey and Ori Goldberg, who I have on now, are my two regulars talking with me about the Middle East. And I think he provides a really interesting and personal perspective that I think is important. He's joining me from Israel, and he's one of the dissident voices over there. How are you doing?
I'm as well as might be expected. Israel appears to be rapidly going around the bend, but I'm trying to keep it sane. So, okay.
Okay, so I know we have to get into the fact that the Strait of Hormuz has been closed again, that there's fighting in Lebanon. But first, I wanted to ask you, what's the impressions in Israel of what's happening just with the U.S. and the Iran talks? Because I saw, I don't know if it was today or yesterday, but Miriam Adelson's outlet, Israel Hayom, was losing its mind over this. I think they basically said that Trump has betrayed everyone. I'm sure Itamar Ben Gvir has said his usual shtick. What is going on in Israel? Not just with those sort of right-wing figures, but what's the general tone and tenor of, I guess, discourse there?
There's a lot of confusion because it's very clear that something is happening. I mean, Trump's words, and especially JD Vance's words, are, it's not that Israelis are not accustomed to them. It's that words like these have never been uttered from an American president or from an American vice president. This is very dramatic. So there are a lot of Israelis who at a gut level will really consider it either treason or craziness, but it's something very, very much out of the ordinary. This is not supposed to happen. America is not supposed to be snide, when it comes to Israel. America is not supposed to be talking as though Israel is attacking it. America is certainly not supposed to be addressing Israel as though its actions are against American interests. So there's a lot of confusion. The easiest explanation, the one which goes well with the sort of mass hysteria / psychosis that's been overtaking Israeli public consciousness over the past 3 years, is that global anti-Semitism has reached its peak. Trump is merely a vessel. He's as flaky as he always was, but the real truth is that the world hates us, and ultimately we stand alone, and we must take care of ourselves, and we must take charge of our destiny and clear the Middle East for our existence. But then again, it's also clear that elections are supposed to be called in Israel around October, and that this is also part of electioneering. And it's clear that Prime Minister Netanyahu is disliked by a lot of people as much as he's liked by others. And those people are criticizing him for not being firm enough with Trump. This is an important point, which I assume we'll get back to later. The criticism is not over the impact of the war, but about Netanyahu not being firm enough with Trump and not making sure that the residents
Who are
of
you
Israel.
talking about here in this? Are you talking about figures like Lapid?
Yeah, I'm talking about the would-be opposition, but also about what in Hebrew is often referred to as the protest, the people who have been protesting against Netanyahu for years now, even preceding October 7th, 2023. The people who supposedly very much mistrust Netanyahu's policies and principled worldview and think that that the potential for liberal Israel is going to the dogs, whereas Israel is becoming more religious and fanatic and messianic. But these people are, of course, not criticizing Netanyahu's policies in Gaza. They never have. In fact, many of these protesters will protest on a Saturday night and then drive to their bomber squadrons and bomb the hell out of Gaza, killing as many civilians as they happen to kill that day. So there's a lot of confusion. It's clear that it's clear that the center cannot hold, although it's not clear what the center is. And but it's also clear. Two other things are evidently clear. One is that the Palestinians no longer exist in mainstream Israeli discourse. Settlers are very much concerned with what's happening in the West Bank and with getting control of more and more of areas A and B under the Oslo agreements. But other than the settlers, nobody remembers the Palestinians, and obviously would never dream of offering the Palestinians any kind of reward for their behavior at times like these. So no Palestinians. Now it's all about Iran, which of course it wasn't for 2.5 years. And the other thing that is very much there is that any aggressive move towards Iran is good, because Iran is fanatic, Nazi in orientation, fully devoted to the destruction of Israel and the death of all Jews. And the only question is how to carry out the war against Iran in a fashion that would be wise and effective enough to get the job done. These things are staples of Israeli discourse. Now, take that, and on those foundations, build a political house that is to your liking. It can be center, it can be center-left. You can talk about Israel fighting Iran because it doesn't want to be Iran. Or you can talk about Israel fighting Iran because Iran is a constant security threat and has, in fact, orchestrated every other security threat that we've encountered so far over the past 3 years, that Palestinians were not at all, of any kind of importance. This was always a war against Iran. You can talk about a battle of civilizations. You can do whatever you want, as long as you remember that fighting Iran is good and that there are no Palestinians to be spoken for or of at this point in time.
Well, it's almost like there's this view that the Palestinians only exist because of Iran, or that all these problems would just go away if Iran went away. Somehow the Palestinian issue for Israelis would just go away if Iran was dealt with. Yeah,
precisely. But remember that this was exactly the case with Hamas a year ago. Okay? If only Hamas goes away, then everything's great. But then it turns out that all the Palestinians support Hamas. So you've got 2 or 3 million subjects behind enemy lines in Gaza and the West Bank, and you have to find a way to take care of them. But you can't really say the words ethnic cleansing or genocide. So this is all about finding the correct procedural language and moves with which to take care of the Palestinian problem. But now there's no Palestinian problem. Now the boogeyman is Iran, not Hamas. And yes, exactly. If only Iran were to go away. And we expected that the United States would be our partner in a prolonged war that would finally rid the Middle East of the Iranian demon. Whereas, of course, it was completely the other way around, because we sold this quote unquote war to the United States as a very quick, lethal, spectacular operation that would give Trump a whole lot of points in a political arena that at the time was focused on the Epstein files. Who remembers the Epstein files now? Right? Now it's all about Iran, whether Iran is a threat to world peace, and whether Iran possesses the ballistic missiles that would carry the non-existent Iranian bomb to Washington. Were I an alien landing somewhere right now and simply observing what's happening, I would just be beside myself because I wouldn't understand anything. First and foremost, it's basically complete craziness. It's not even racism or Islamophobia or anti-Semitism or whatever. It's just really this constant hashing and rehashing and an enormous grab bag of would-be issues that are supposed to make everything okay, where nothing is actually okay, and none of these issues would contribute in any way to world peace or world order.
This is going to sound like a really strange question, but let's say somehow all issues with Iran were just resolved tomorrow, or Iran disappeared, or the regime changed entirely. Would there still be panic in Israel about some other country? Like, would the fear become Turkey? Would it become Qatar? Like, is there sort of this crazy making going on where there's always a search for the next enemy?
Not a strange or crazy question at all. That perfectly not just legitimate, but spot on. I mean, we've already had a government minister say, rest easy. Iran's not the real problem. We're going to be at war with Syria and Turkey any day now because obviously they're the real enemy. Yes, Israel and the rationale that stands behind Israel and this current government, which really is a radicalization of everything that Israel has been throughout the nearly 8 decades of its existence, is based on the existence of this all-out enemy, of this entity that draws its livelihood from the potential and the realization of Israel's destruction. And if you haven't got an enemy that qualifies, then you make one up. Because if you don't make one up, then what are you doing? What are we talking about?
I wanted to ask you as well, since I mentioned, and I don't want to mispronounce his name, but I mentioned the opposition leader. I think, is it Yar or Yair?
Yair.
Yeah, yeah, Lapid.
Lapid.
Um, what do you make of his comments about this is really bad for the region? Is it just more of the sort of same from the opposition?
Well, first, I would call him a true contender for the prize of dumbest Israeli politician, with his closest rival being the current defense minister, Israel Katz. He is just, Lapid is just, you know what he is? I don't know how many of our listeners or viewers remember this, but he is one of those wild and crazy dudes played by Dan Aykroyd and Steve Martin at the beginning of Saturday Night Live, the heyday of Saturday Night Live.
I was going to add real quick, just real quick. I was going to say, so what I was referring to, the bad for the region, he said the emerging deal
Yeah.
with Iran is bad for the region. But go on. I like this comparison to Dan Aykroyd.
He's a wild and crazy dude. He's out on the town, ready to party. Nothing about him sits accurately, from his accent, which for the crazy brothers was, I think, supposed to be Czech, to his conclusions and his understanding of what is happening. None of his observations. It's not that he's wrong. It's not that he represents a potentially destructive political position. It's just that he's really out there. He just published a pretty lengthy statement describing the collapse of Cuba is proof positive that socialism doesn't work and is completely contrary to human nature. We're talking about that sort of dumbness, not, dumb in the sense of being dismissive of him as I don't agree with him or nothing or anything. This is existential dumbness. And that's about as far as the Israeli opposition goes. The opposition is not against anything that Netanyahu actually does in terms of fulfilling substantive Israeli security policy. The opposition does not stand in defiance of Netanyahu on socioeconomic affairs either. Netanyahu is a Thatcherite. Okay, he's really like a very intense, hardcore right-wing economics guy. And he was like that right from the start when it was not very popular. In the early 80s, he was like that. He was talking about that. And the Israeli opposition is exactly there. I mean, the supposed, what remains of the Israeli labor movement? They don't call themselves labor now. They call themselves the Democrats. They're led by
Right.
an ex.
That's Golan, right?
That's another Yair, but that's Golan. That's right. And they call themselves the Democrats now, and they're supposedly a leftist party. Some would even go as far as saying extreme leftist party. But their chief, Yair Golan himself, said that he is taking active steps to remove the party from the word left because it's not a left-wing party. And he has no problem with the wildest, craziest statements on the effects of rapid privatization on the Israeli economy that have really pushed disparity in Israeli society to unheard of levels. Nothing is important. The only important thing right now is Netanyahu. Will he stay in power or won't he? There's absolutely no substantive argument on actual issues. There's no opposition at all to the genocidal campaign Israel's been carrying out in Gaza. There's no attempt to propose any kind of meaningful dialogue with the Palestinians, not even the ones in the West Bank. There are very weak voices among Jewish politicians who are supposedly suggesting this, but they really aren't. No head of an opposition party has. I mean, we're talking about an opposition that has vocally said outright that they are not willing to form a ruling coalition with with Palestinian Israeli parties. And that's normal. That's a basic stance. So there is no opposition.
That's a
What's
really
more,
strange development, or not even development, but like that must be a strange world to live in where the axis of the world just revolves around Bibi Netanyahu, and there's no real politics. There's only this cult of personality against or for Netanyahu, and then those that oppose him. But it's almost like people don't even know why anymore.
no, people don't know why. That's precisely correct. That's exactly it. And maybe the worst thing is that people don't care anymore. It's not just that they don't know. The ignorance is one thing, the indifference is another. They don't care. They just assume that everything has collapsed, that the only issue that matters is, Netanyahu, whether he's in power or not, and that the one necessary element of a safe life for Jewish Israelis is a forever war. I mean, when people are talking about an issue that's been supposedly the bane of Israeli national unity for years now, which is the conscription of the ultra-Orthodox. Okay, should they be conscripted into the military or not? Nobody's saying let's not conscript them and scale down the war fighting in any case. We don't need them. What everybody is saying is we have to conscript them because the IDF needs 12,000. That's a magic number at the moment. 12,000 soldiers ready and waiting because that is the level of war fighting that the military expects for the foreseeable future. So that means more war. Now, I'm not a big fan of the ultra-Orthodox. They are rabid, ultra-right-wing nationalists. They're not a contributing part of society in any way. And sometimes they are remarkably obnoxious, and their leadership is known for its very blatant corruption. But the notion that they need to be conscripted, and this is universally held, because the only thing that matters is how many soldiers the IDF has. Gives you a good example of the sort of environment you were talking about. It is perhaps more than anything weird. It's just really weird. You can take it apart and you can find a host of other pejoratives. Okay, you can talk about how racist it is. You can talk about the bloodlust. You can talk about the lethality. I've talked a lot about solipsism. It's all there. But at the very heart of it lies this, what is for me an impenetrable weirdness. It's not something that you get. And the desire, and there exists a real desire all over the world to just make it mean something. Make Israel be an orderly villain, okay? Make Israel have a plan. Make the plan be sensible. Even world domination works. But this weirdness, the indifference, it doesn't compute, but that's the way it is. And prices are spiraling, and it's more difficult than ever to buy a home here. It's more difficult than ever to fly out of here because flight prices are ridiculous. It's impossible to plan anything more than a week or two ahead because who knows what war might break out. I mean, Israel is officially fighting on 7 fronts. You don't know. But this weirdness seems to be the new normal.
Now, I guess we have to get into this. So, Vice President here in the U.S., JD Vance, made some comments that caused a bit of a discussion recently. He said, Israel needs to understand we're your only ally left. Trump is your only ally left. And he also went as far as to saying Israel can't kill its way out of security problems. What do you make of his statements? I don't trust Vance and I don't trust Trump with changing any kind of policy when it comes to the Middle East because it seems like everything's been whiplash here. 1 second it's where we're going to be more critical of Israel. The next it's we're more critical of Iran. So for me, it's like I just take everything with a grain of salt. How do you feel about his statements though, and what's the feeling in Israel more broadly?
First, I agree with your stance, in principle and effectively. There's no reason to trust these folks. They haven't done anything to earn that trust.
I do think you though are more open to this idea that the Trump administration probably has a lot of real issues with Netanyahu. But go on.
Yeah, but that's the point. That's exactly why I think they're telling the truth. They have absolutely no interest in telling the truth other than this being the actual truth, and that they stand a chance to profit from it. I think that's a really important point. I don't think they're telling the truth because they've been so logical and dependable and worthwhile or noble about it. I think they're telling the truth because they're assholes. And they take care of number one. And this is the truth. And they've been disrespected by Netanyahu to such an extent. And this is particularly true of Trump. He doesn't really care. He never cared. He's not Biden. I think Biden was truly a Zionist. There was an ideological issue there. And I wasn't surprised to hear that Biden's State Department and National Security Council were really literally ordered to blur the issues and to hide facts because it was important for Biden to have Israel come out with the upper hand, both morally and strategically. Trump doesn't care. It's about getting some for Trump or not getting some for Trump. And I think he's reached the bottom of the well with Israel. He understands that he's not going to get anything more. It's just not worth it for him. He's being badmouthed and trashed and disrespected and described in very base terms. Vance, being a totally different can of worms, has proven that he will sell his soul to the highest bidder for power, which means that he can identify who is in a position to provide him with that power and who isn't. And Israel isn't. He's throwing Israel under the bus because it's very clear that Israel has exhausted all of its options, and not in an anti-Semitic way, just by doing everything that we are seeing very, very clearly. Israel is more disrespectful towards its allies than it is towards its foes. Let's not talk about the United States. Let's talk about Germany. Nobody has been more fervent in supporting the Israeli cause than German Chancellor Merz. Israel has repeatedly thrown Merz and his emissaries under the very same bus, accusing him of anti-Semitism, the head of a state in which the Constitution describes one of the reasons for the state's very being as the defense of Israel. We're talking about an Israeli foreign minister who has publicly and in very brutish and coarse fashion disrespected the EU Commissioner for Foreign Affairs, Kaja Kallas from Estonia, who is also on record as ludicrously supporting Israel across the board, and not talking about Palestinians, blaming Iran for everything, doing everything that was once okay to pass Israel's examinations. It doesn't add up. And I think if you were to ask even people like, I don't know, Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of the Anti-Defamation League, who is also a very well-known Hasbara activist, has been an Israeli mouthpiece, who hasn't said one original thing since the beginning of the war. It's not an accident that he's being silent right now. It's not an accident that the people who are being brought out right now on all sides are the true crazies. It's not coincidental that you get a lot of people like Mark Levin on the American right. Because Mark Levin is insane. You're not even talking about Tucker Carlson. And the same thing is true on the Israeli side. You're talking about people, somebody like Greenblatt wouldn't sign his name to the daily messaging sheet that Hasbara activists are getting at, because there's nothing to defend. And that's the sort of logic that I'm applying to this situation. That's why I think you have to assume that they're telling the truth. And I doubt hell hath more fury, even more than a woman scorned, than a Trump scorned on a very personal basis. And I'll add two more cents to this. This is a very rare opportunity for Trump, because suddenly you've got an aligning of interests. What he says for his reasons is pretty similar to what the EU thinks for the EU's reasons. But it's also pretty similar to what President Xi of China thinks for his own reasons. Vance was right. Israel doesn't have any more allies left, and it's all Israel's doing. And that's one thing we have to remember. As horrible as evil is when you stare it in the face, and what Israel is doing now is really evil. Evil is also pathetic. And it needs to be called out as pathetic to be able to destabilize it. It needs to be demeaned. And I really sincerely believe we're not all that far away from there.
Now, in terms of what's happened in the past day, what do you make of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz? And what maybe misinformation or disinformation are we getting about the renewed fighting in Lebanon?
I'm not particularly impressed that the closure of the Straits of Hormuz says anything but, this is a negotiations tactic. Very obvious. The talks have been renewed, maybe not at vice presidential level, but it's clear to everybody that, this is Israel. And we've also had leaks from the DNA in the United States, the director of the director of national intelligence, who has very much said outright that Israel is expected to try and rock the boat. And that's exactly what Israel is doing. So I don't think the Iranians are overly excited. I don't think the Americans are overly excited. I don't think this is going to drag on. This isn't Gaza. We're not going to have some board of peace that can take 3 years to settle some obscure dispute. Although I think Israel is going to get it when it comes to the Palestinians as well, but that'll take some time. I think that with this issue, because Trump doesn't want to be Hoover, and Trump has a vested interest in the Strait staying open, I think this is being managed directly between Washington and Tehran. And I think Israel is doing exactly what it's being told to do. As far as the fighting in Lebanon goes, I can only say that it really is the most horrible thing, because the dozens of Lebanese, if not more by now, who have been losing their lives are losing their lives for nothing. This is merely posturing. This is achieving nothing. This is collapsing no known infrastructure. This is devoid of any kind of military achievement. This is just Israel doing the only thing it can do. And sadly, the world is in such a state where the killing of brown people, if you'll pardon the cliche, is just worthless enough to be able to stress a point. Okay, you can do it simply to add an exclamation point to show that you're serious. And the proof of that is that Israel has been holding its fire now. And Israel will try. The military has said we can't leave Lebanon. But let me just share an anecdote with you. On Ynet, which is Israel's largest, probably most impactful communications website, one of the commentators said that the IDF realizes that the Lebanese government is too weak to fully disarm Hezbollah, and only the IDF could do it. But to do that would require taking over most of the territory of the Lebanese state.
This is very funny because I remember, what was it, a year or so ago, we were all hearing Hezbollah is done for, Nasrallah is gone, we assassinate, and Hezbollah is still here.
Still here with bells on. So we're talking about a fantasy land. None of this is real, okay, except for the people dying. And again, it's horrible to be able to take this in stride, to say, people are dying, but that's the cost of doing business. But apparently, when you're in Israel's shoes, and again, not because of the bloodlust, just simply because Israel has painted itself into a corner where the only thing it can do is kill and destroy. And that's even more true now when it's being made clear to Israel that nobody supports it. So Israel is going to kill and destroy on steroids, which is what it's doing. But the only way to stop Israel now is not to blink. What you need is a political wherewithal on both the Iranian and the American sides, and it appears to exist so far. And it's very clear right from the start that this is what is happening. Okay? Nobody has any illusions about why Israel is doing what it's doing. Nobody really thinks that Israel is defending itself. I mean, I just did a very brief interview for the BBC before we talked, and their Jerusalem correspondent said that we have to remember that, the IDF was saying that Israel was simply retaliating to dozens of rockets being fired at its troops. And that retaliation involved killing 100 people in Lebanon. But what nobody said was that these rockets were being fired at Israeli forces who were illegally operating in strict violation of the MOU on Lebanese soil. Israel wasn't attacked. This is an illegal force carrying out an illegal invasion, and it was being repelled. And that is considered a proper excuse for Israel doing what it's doing. By the way, I apologize for the Grover-like quality of my voice. It's just a side effect of the chemo I'm getting. So it's the way it is. I can't help it.
I also wanted to ask you, in regards to all of this, it just feels like Israel is having what amounts to a temper tantrum. And I was thinking about that in regards to, I don't know if you saw Danny Zeichen's latest article in
I did.
Israel Hayom. You could have been the greatest president of all, but you failed. And it's just him hand-wringing over, in a single moment, the contempt you once faced suddenly seems so justified and logical. He writes to the U.S. president. What do you make of that? I think that op-ed actually says a lot about the mindset that some in Israel have.
I'm thinking about the your typical Midwestern gentleman who, the basic response would sort of be like, what's Mr. Wilson, Dennis the Menace's nemesis. The audacity of this man, the fact that you've got this Israeli pundit who's giving grades to Trump, that he could have been the greatest president. Why? Because he would have done exactly what Israel told him to do. It's ludicrous. It's really what it is.
Well, he was going to be the savior of the enlightened world, though. He was going to defeat the caliphate.
Of course, where Israel stands for the enlightened world, obviously. And sorry, I'm just shutting the door. Where Israel stands for the enlightened world, and Israel's desires demonstrate exactly what the enlightened world wants, and you have no other measure for that. That's insane. I can't put it any other way. It's just insane. And the one thing you can do when you read it in the funnies is just, Chuck O'Reilly, assuming you don't care about the Lebanese who die. Really, I just the sheer gall of it makes it somewhat unbelievable. But there you go.
I was going to say we had a sort of similar reaction here in the U.S. from one of America's big Israel boosters. And I'm not even, for once, I'm not talking about Mark Levin. I'm talking about Batya Ungar-Sargon, who I often feel as if her only issue
Yeah.
is Israel ultimately. And I think you could even make this case about figures like Barry Weiss, where this becomes the all-consuming force. She went from one day saying, "My God, Trump is playing 4D chess. Iran is on its back," and then literally the next day, it's Trump has ruined everything. This is the final humiliation of America. The world is ending. It's
Yes.
really kind of insane.
It's like, I mean, the one reaction, if I'm going straight from the Midwest to your stereotypical inhabitant of Santa Monica, California, is to take a chill pill, dude. I mean, like, what are you talking about? How can this be true if this is the level of intensity and veracity? You're obviously lying or you're tripping, and both are true in this case. And this is an essential point that it's almost absurdly difficult to make. But I try to stress this whenever I talk about it. What most people are seeing logically is actually true. It's actual reality. And you and I have made this point repeatedly. Israel has invested millions and millions and millions in gaslighting the entire world, and it's collapsing because what Israel is saying is untrue.
You
And
said it
and the,
gaslit the entire world. This leads me to something I wanted to ask you.
okay.
I think it was an article in Haaretz
Mhm.
back when the election in Kentucky was happening with Thomas Massey. Um, and the article was something along the lines of the headline, "This is the most consequential U.S. election for Israel." And I, I wonder if Israel has gaslit itself because I'm not sure.
Yes.
Thomas Massey did lose that election, and there was a lot of money that went into trying to counter him because of his views on Israel. AIPAC put a lot of money into that, but I don't know that that was going to be the be all end all. And I think we're seeing that, JD Vance and Trump are willing to throw Israel under the bus. But there was this sense that, oh, Massey's defeated. Everything is all clear for all of us pro-Zionist or pro-Israel voices. And that turned out not to be true. But I think it's interesting that there was this sense in certain articles and words amongst the chattering class that this is the only thing that matters. Massey being defeated is the final victory, right? I mean, I think in a way that's indicative of sort of self-gaslighting in a way.
I think you're absolutely right. I take your point. Apologies for for using so many drug references and metaphors, but yeah, Israel is high on its own supply. I mean, what else are you going to do if you are thoroughly isolated? That's all you can do. You can just smoke your own supply until it's completely depleted. And yes, you're absolutely right. Israel has gaslit itself. The only reason I'm slightly reluctant to use that freely is because it also encourages the assumption that Israelis didn't know. I just heard from a friend who's also active on these things. He also holds a Middle Eastern Studies PhD, and he had somebody who's 65 or 66 wrote him about how he volunteered for the Army Reserves, and he traveled through the West Bank, and he finally saw how Israel had been hijacked by Jewish jihadis and how it was a messianic terrorist state now, and now we have to fight back. That's great. But dude, where were you for 3 years? All of this was so extensively reported, so blatantly uttered by those very same politicians. Where were you? That's not something you can take with grace anymore. So Israelis knew, and Israelis actively supported it, and Israelis actively support it still. What they don't support is, these Johnny-come-latelys, these settlers who think that they can run the country. They can't run the country. Give it to the right people, to the smart people, and you'll see how you can manage an occupation effectively, but without all of this hullabaloo, right? And as for Thomas Massie, you're always one victory away from absolute triumph when you've got a mindset like this.
Real quick, I guess what I was trying to say earlier was it just seemed like a very weird headline. This is the
Yeah,
most consequential election for Israel. It's an election in Kentucky
yeah.
over a congressional seat. It's bizarre to think that one election had so much. It got into the mind space of chattering class types in Israel enough that headline was a thing. It's happening halfway across the world, and it's a small election, to be honest.
I obviously agree with you, and that's another for me. That's another point supporting why I think Trump is telling the truth, because Trump thought this was an existential election as well. He put all of his efforts into beating Massie. So Trump is of the same mindset as Israel. And he's still saying Israel is doing what Israel is doing. So you trust Trump not because, but despite of everything he said and is saying so far. That's why I find what he's saying on this subject to be credible.
It's almost like every little thing becomes magnified into being an existential threat within the Israeli sort of chattering
Oh,
classes or the collective.
sure. It's all pregnant with meaning and potential. But as a nation and as a society, we've given up on the future. We don't commit to a future. The only thing we can commit to is a present, right? And that present includes a forever war. That's all there is. So we are happy to talk about the future of other societies. We're happy to describe in great detail how Europe is finished and done for because it's been thoroughly Islamicized. You get this in like travel groups on Israeli social media. You get people saying, is it safe to go to, I don't know, Sweden? Because we've heard so much about Islamic fanaticism in Malmo or whatever. Seriously? An Israeli is asking whether it's safe to go to Sweden? Yes, dude, it's much safer than it is to be here. So yeah, that's the kind of and
It
suddenly
reminds me of not to interrupt you. I hope
no. Go ahead.
I was going to say, both you and I know Yoav Shamir, and I'm reminded of
Yep.
his documentary Defamation, where
Mhm.
these Israeli students end up going to, I forget if it's Poland or they go to a European country to try to understand the Holocaust and go on this engagement to learn about the suffering of the Holocaust. And there's points where they're like talking. One of the students is talking to this citizen of that country, and the citizen just says, "I don't know what you're saying. What language are you speaking?" You know, and she
Yeah.
takes it as, "Oh my God, he called me a bitch. This is an anti-Semitism." But it sounds like that kind of miscommunication and that kind of paranoia is now on steroids.
Yeah,
Because
exactly.
that
I
that
don't.
movie was what I think like 2009. Now it's
No,
like that tripled, doubled, quadrupled.
nothing ever changes here. It only intensifies. And I don't remember if I shared this joke with you. It's like the flip side of what you're saying is you have two recent immigrants, Israeli businessmen, who feel like they've settled in for long enough to feel comfortable. So they go to synagogue, they go to temple. And when they leave, they talk to each other, and one of them says to the other, that was a transformative experience. I don't ever remember a Jewish rabbi in Israel talking like the rabbi here talked about. I can understand what a sermon is. I fully sympathize. And the other one says, yeah, that's great, but can you tell me what tikkun olam means in Hebrew? Okay, because like for your listeners who don't get the reference, tikkun olam, making the world right and proper, is a Hebrew phrase that's used by American Jewry as one of the perhaps the central moral mission of Jews in the world, to make the world a more virtuous society. So this guy listens to the American rabbis use tikkun olam, and then he says, "What the hell does that mean in Hebrew? I've never heard it in Hebrew." So yeah, that's the sort of exactly that's the sort of miscommunication that we're talking about.
How do you see this panning out going forward? Is it more frightening or more pathetic? Or is it both?
Yeah, it's probably both, and I think the Iran issue will be settled quickly. The Iranians don't have, they don't want to appear like they have got forever. They're not the EU as far as they're concerned. They want a decision and a commitment from Trump, and they're right in their desire. As far as the Palestinians go, the very sad criminal truth is that nobody cares about the Palestinians. But I actually think that if Israel continues to harp on, destabilizing any attempts to talk meaningfully to the Iranians, Trump, simply out of spite, not because he cares, not because of his values, he's going to stick it to the Israelis about the Palestinians as well. And in doing that, he will have the support of, well, basically everyone, from Gulf leaderships to President Xi in Beijing, everyone. And I think we are on the verge of seeing really, really miraculous events, at least as far as the past 6 or 7 decades have prepared us for. I think that the age of absolute Israeli impunity is done. And again, I don't trust Trump, and I wouldn't give Trump an iota of credit. I don't trust him at all. But I don't think he can be bought off on this issue because this is about his pride, okay? And it's also about his legacy and what he's going to find out, I hope. And maybe I'm just projecting my own thoughts. Maybe I'm being carelessly optimistic. I think he's going to find out that if he manages to create some kind of long-term resolution for the Middle East, he's going to be remembered much more fondly than if he were to, be the president who ended 8 or 10 or 15 wars or whatever other wars he makes up. There's
I
a
was
lot.
going to add to that. I think
Yeah.
it's legacy, but I also think I don't, and this is maybe I'm psychoanalyzing Trump too much, but I think he's also a very petty person.
Yeah.
I think we can all say that. And people say someone like Larry Ellison was more MAGA than MAGA, but people forget Larry Ellison abandoned Trump essentially after Jan 6th and then
Mhm.
came back to Trump. But before he came back to Trump, he was giving money to both Democrats and he gave money to the presidential campaign of Rick Scott, which was an absolute failure, right? Trump doesn't forget things like that. I think Trump is
No.
a very petty person. And when he
Yes,
sees an opportunity to punish those that he thinks have betrayed him in the past, he'll do it.
I agree completely. And again, I think that makes for a pretty powerful case as far as where Trump will land on the issue of Israel. I think a person like Trump, so petty, so on the verge, if not already in the throes of dementia, so focused on himself and his own ego, maybe the only kind of leader who would have been able to do something about Israel's impenetrable armor as far as U.S. public opinion is concerned. Not because he's a good person, because he's a bad person. And sometimes it takes two negatives to create a positive. And Israel is again making all the wrong choices, is doing everything it can to amplify uh, how devoid of morals it is, how unstable as a potential partner is, how very few actual returns it gives the United States for a huge investment in everything from operational intelligence to potential high-end scientific research. Israel doesn't do anything that China doesn't do. And I think Trump is in a unique position, and his people are in a unique position to assess this, and also to figure out truths that are well known to just about everybody. Most Jews vote for Democrats. Even now, even with people like Batya Ungar Sargon and all of these loudmouth activists hyping this up, most Jews vote for Democrats.
Right.
The Democrat
The American Jewish population has not become Norman or John Podhoretz.
exactly, and good thing. Nor
Right.
has it become, nor has it become Eli Lake. And you know, the Democratic Party, whether it likes it or not, is going to have to revitalize itself for 2028. And who knows how it will revitalize itself. Now, Israel is long, it's a long time since Israel has been a bipartisan issue. Okay, it's a very partisan issue. And the American population doesn't want to talk about Israel so much. You were saying you've got these activists who only talk about Israel. You've got your Barry Weisses who only talk about Israel. That's another thing to remember about evil. It's not just pathetic, it's boring. You know, my favorite writer in the whole world, Ursula K. Le Guin, made a very powerful case for how we are culturally programmed to treat evil as complex and interesting, whereas good is treated as boring and one-dimensional. But it can also be the other way around. It very often is. And
Hannah Arendt's The Banality of Evil.
yeah, and there's a lot of, I think, American society, I haven't turned around on, I still feel like there are a lot of deep core flaws in American society, but American society is still capable of goodness and it's still capable of innovation. And it's still capable of changing its mind, which Israeli society is not. So I don't know how much comfort this is going to bring Palestinian activists, but I really do think that the past few days are nothing short of stupendous. You know, things are actually happening. And yes, they're happening at a rhetorical level. Yes, they're happening in back rooms, but they are happening and they've never happened before. You've never had this happen before. That's really important to understand.
Before closing out, if you have a few more minutes, the other
Sure.
thing that was really interesting about Vance's comments is he didn't come off as being particularly anti-Israel in
Mhm.
those comments. He wasn't threatening Israel. In fact, I think he was trying to give advice. He was saying, listen, we're the only ones you have left. The rest of the world hates you. So
Yeah.
so I would advise you not ruin this relationship. And you know, even saying you can't kill your way out of all your security problems. He wasn't saying this as like a super adversary to Israel, but I think a lot of pro-Israel voices interpret it as such, and I think that's an interesting disconnect. 'Cause I don't think what he was saying was even meant to be a threat.
I think it's a case of cultural ignorance. I think people don't understand, people in Israel don't understand modes of American courtesy. I think, I mean, add that to the fact that anything said even remotely that is not full approval of everything Israel says, does, or thinks is considered to be anti-Israel. But let's leave that aside. I think you're absolutely right. I think people didn't understand Vance's very Midwestern sort of matter-of-fact courtesy. You know, get your act together. You know, get a grip. I think that's what he was saying. He was saying, get a grip. You know, we're still here. We're not going anywhere. But you got to do this for us. And when we pick up the phone and ask you not to disturb our efforts to negotiate with the Iranians, take it into account that we actually mean what we say. Don't disrupt our efforts. You know, we are your friends. I absolutely agree with your analysis.
The last thing I wanted to ask you about, and I don't even know if I want to be careful about how I talk about it, but a lot of people in the past have talked about weaponization of anti-Semitism. I'm even seeing this weird phenomena where Well, I'll give the example of John Podhoretz when Massey lost. He was bragging and talking about we used our Jewish money to defeat Thomas Massey, and I think there were weirdly similar comments recently made at an American Jewish Committee meeting where one of the speakers talked about instead of trying to control the world through narratives and media, we should be uh, lobbying the AI firms. And I just found it weird because, first off, I don't think uh, there's some Jewish conspiracy. I don't believe in stuff like the Protocols of Zion. But the way a John Podhoretz or that person at the AJC were speaking, it's almost like they're trying to get people to believe that that is a thing. You know, it's like Michael Rappaport a few years ago when the Gaza stuff happened, this Jewish comedian, he was saying, we're going to shut down your bank accounts. I have friends. I have friends. And I'm thinking to myself, you're creating a sort of narrative that where you're almost trying to get people to buy into this protocols of Zion type conspiracy theory. And I don't understand why there's certain people trying to do that are Jewish because it's like they're trying to manifest something that isn't there.
Yet again, I wholeheartedly agree. And I think I can give you a fairly simple explanation. When you don't have even one foot in the real world, okay, when you're forced to, for your very survival, detach yourself from this mortal coil and live in some kind of free-floating ideal fantasy, then you need these enabling fantasies of conspiratorial overall strength. Then you
I
need to
guess
be
what it,
able.
yeah, real quick.
Yeah,
I guess what I'm saying is it's like I see certain pro-Israel Jewish voices that actually are promoting the anti-Semitic tropes.
sure, because there's nothing that, first of all, because all of these things are cyclical, okay? They turn on themselves. Anti-Semitism is not a linear narrative. And second, I mean, that's the only thing you have left because you're such an arch villain and you've exhausted all potential venues of logical villainy, of logical relationships with other countries or other forces. Where else can you go? Yeah, you need that stuff. You don't just do it because it's fun or to divert attention. You do it because you have a deep need for it because, as you said very much, I mean, very correctly, when you said Israel gaslights itself, that's another aspect of it. Israel needs to believe these things because otherwise, what's left? Then again, Vance said this very clearly. What's left? Nothing's left. Okay? There's nothing there unless you can, as you say, manifest these things, unless you can make them true through the sheer power of faith. And that is, it's not an interesting cultural tidbit. It's a necessity. If you can't do that, then you can't survive if you're Israel. So absolutely, yeah.
It's scary too because so when I try to discuss these things, I try to get people to think in terms of criticizing the state of Israel or even and I want to be careful how I put this. I think you can also criticize the American Jewish political establishment, right? I mean, there is, figures like Greenblatt are part of an establishment that sort of dictates the tenor and tone of discussion within the Jewish community. I don't think that's a controversial claim.
Yep.
But when you have people like Podhoretz or Michael Rappaport literally trying to legitimize these anti-Semitic tropes, people start saying, well, what about what Rappaport said? What about what John Podhoretz said? And then they start blaming the Jewish people writ large. And it's very scary because I think it's feeding into an anti-Semitic current that is
It's
rising.
it's scary at two levels. One is the one you're mentioning, obviously. It's a very tangible threat, where you can't detach this current of anti-Semitism from Israel's actions. And these actions are not just the slaughter of Lebanese, but also doing things like that, empowering and enabling conspiracies. But it's also very scary at a broader, global level, because it's like put the purple rose of Cairo coming to life. It's like what happens when all of these images, when all of these stereotypes just walk off the screen? This isn't AI. This is AI on very negative uh, nuclear steroids. Because this has no commitment to truth. This is no commitment to some kind of political agenda or value. This is just a complete rejection of reality in favor of these supposedly easily manipulable images, but they're not easy to manipulate. They take on a life of their own. And you're screwed if you don't know what to do with them properly. And Israel certainly doesn't. And I don't know if the world does, but Israel is unleashing this prospect on the world unknowingly, but with very, very frightening potential results. I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
Just in closing, I was going to add, it reminds me of, I know it's not, necessarily a highbrow movie, but it kind of reminds me of the movie Brian De Palma's Scarface. It's like,
Yeah.
As the movie goes on, Tony Montana is increasingly more unhinged because he's doing massive amounts of cocaine. He's getting high on the supply, and it all leads to a spectacular downfall. Because Tony does become completely unhinged and unmoored from reality, and I think that's what we're seeing now as a comparison.
I think that's a very polite metaphor. I think reality might even be worse, but I completely agree with you. Yeah, this is all Israel doing everything on its own. There's no complexity here. There's no, you have to understand the situation. Maybe there was in the beginning. I don't think so. I don't think genocide allows for complexity. But this is not even about the genocide anymore. This is about the train wreck. And it's happening right here, right now. It could have been prevented in so many stages. America plays a big part in the fact that it wasn't averted, the catastrophe. And America might be the one, Trump's America specifically, might be the only civilizational power existing now that is in a position to stop this.
I want to thank you again, Ori Goldberg, for coming on Parallax Views. Let my listeners know how they can keep up with your work and writing.
I'm on Twitter. I'm on Substack. My information is accessible to just about everybody, and I'm happy to talk. And I'm out there. It's not difficult to find me. And thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
A special thanks to my $10 and above tier supporters on Patreon, who make this show possible with their generous donations. Producers' credits shout out to those supporters: Aaron, Fabian, Jeremy, Matt, Big Bob's Beepers, James, Enoch, David, Sadad, Tristan, Bob, Eva, Miriam, West Bank Robbery Pod, B. Lund, Transnatural Perspectives Podcast, Dan, Nick, Elliot, Fabian, Tom, Arlen, Bo, Spartacus, James, G, Jamie, Will, JC, WV, Sutra, Orc, Catherine, Aaron, Darko, Nathan, Holland, Dan, Mark, Chase, Olm, Gary, Nobody, Emilia, Nick, Brace, Michael, and Brian. Please join those listeners in supporting me at the $10 and above tier of my Patreon page, patreon.com/parallaxviews, if you'd like your very own producer's credit on each and every edition of the program. Until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with JD Mike. To Parallax Views with JD Views.
The way out is not simply to say, don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.